The jurors have returned. Please be seated. The court will formally call 21 CR 2794, People of the State of Colorado v. Nathan Woodyard. The parties and counsel are present. The jurors have returned. Folks on the jury, I do want to describe how the trial will be conducted and explain what we'll be doing. To start with, every person charged with a crime is presumed innocent. This presumption of innocence remains with the defendant throughout the trial and should be given effect by you unless, after considering all the evidence, you are convinced that the defendant, Mr. Woodyard here, is guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. The burden of proof in this case is upon the prosecution, and the prosecution must prove to the satisfaction of the jury beyond a reasonable doubt the existence of each and every element necessary to constitute the crime charged. This burden requires more than proof that something is highly probable, but it does not require proof with absolute certainty. Proof beyond a reasonable doubt is proof that leaves you firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt. If you are firmly convinced of the defendant's guilt, then the prosecution has proven the crime charged beyond a reasonable doubt. But if you think there is a real possibility that the defendant is not guilty, then the prosecution has failed to prove the crime charged beyond a reasonable doubt. After considering all the evidence, if you decide the prosecution has proven each of the elements of a crime charged beyond a reasonable doubt, you should find the defendant guilty of that crime. After considering all the evidence, if you decide the prosecution has failed to prove any one or more of the elements of a crime charged beyond a reasonable doubt, you should find the defendant not guilty of that crime. The first step in the trial will be opening statements. The attorneys may make opening statements if they choose to do so. Counsel for the defendant, Mr. Woodyard, may reserve opening statement until a later time in the trial, or may elect not to make an opening statement. It's important to keep in mind that opening statements are not evidence. The purpose of opening statements is to help you understand what the evidence will be. Next, the prosecution will offer evidence, and evidence consists of sworn testimony of witnesses, exhibits that are admitted into evidence, stipulations, and a stipulation is something that both parties agree to as far as a fact, or judicially noticed facts. That's a little more rare. A judicially noticed fact is one that is typically beyond dispute, such as in the United States, New Year's Day is typically celebrated on the 1st of January. After the prosecution's evidence, the defense may present evidence, but it's important to keep in mind that here the defendant, Mr. Woodyard, is not required to introduce evidence on his behalf. I want to remind you that the defendant, Mr. Woodyard, is presumed to be innocent, and the prosecution must prove the guilt of the defendant beyond a reasonable doubt. The defendant here, Mr. Woodyard, does not have to prove his innocence, call any witnesses, or introduce any evidence. You have to decide what testimony you believe. You should carefully consider all the testimony given and the circumstances under which each witness testifies. Consider each witness's knowledge, motive, state of mind, demeanor, and manner while on the witness stand. Consider the witness's means of knowledge, ability to observe, and strength of memory. Consider also any relationship each witness may have to either side of the case, the manner in which each witness might be affected by the verdict, and the extent to which, if at all, a witness is either supported or contradicted by other evidence in the case. You should consider all facts and circumstances shown by the evidence which affects the credibility of that witness's testimony. You may believe all of the testimony of a witness, or part of it, or none of it. At the conclusion of evidence, I will give you the rules of law that you are to use in reaching a verdict. I will read those rules of law to you, and you'll be allowed to take a paper copy with you back into the jury room for deliberations. After you have heard the evidence and the court reads the instructions, the prosecution and defense may make closing arguments, but like opening statements, closing arguments are not evidence. You will then go into the jury room and deliberate on a verdict. Your purpose as jurors is to decide what the facts are, and your decision must be based solely upon the evidence and the law I give you in the jury instructions. There are going to be times during the trial when attorneys make objections. This simply means that a lawyer is requesting that I make a decision on a particular rule of law. It is the duty of a lawyer to object to evidence which he or she believes is not properly offered. Do not draw any conclusions from the objections or from my rulings on the objections. If I sustain an objection to a question, the witness may not answer it. If I overrule an objection, it means I've decided the point against the attorney who made the objection. As jurors, you must draw no inference from the question or speculate as to what the witness would have said if permitted to answer. At other times, I may instruct you not to consider a particular statement that was made. You must not consider any evidence to which an objection has been sustained or evidence is to be treated as if you had never seen or heard it. It is my job to decide the rules of law that apply in this case. You must follow all of the rules as I explain them. You may not follow some rules and ignore others. And even if you disagree or don't understand the reasons for some of the rules, you still must follow them. You will then apply these rules to the facts which you have determined from the evidence in the case. In this way, you will determine whether the prosecution has proven the guilt of the defendant, Mr. Woodyard, beyond a reasonable doubt. During the trial, I may need to speak to the lawyers outside of your presence about questions of law. Sometimes you may be asked to leave the courtroom while I have these discussions. We will try to limit these interruptions as much as possible. Furthermore, the jury should not infer from any ruling or from anything I say during this trial that I hold any views either for or against any party to this case. You have been provided with notebooks which contain a little bit of information about the case. They should have numbers on them that correspond to your seats. The notebooks may only be used in the courtroom or the jury room. You may take these notebooks from the courtroom to the jury room and from the jury room to the courtroom during your deliberations. However, they may not be taken anywhere else. You've been provided with materials. You can take notes um, in your notebooks if you wish to do so. You're not required to take notes, but as I indicated yesterday, it's expected the trial is going to take at least a couple of weeks, probably into a third week. If you take notes, you should not allow your note-taking to detract from your close attention to the testimony and the conduct of each witness and other evidence produced during the trial. You should not try to summarize all the testimony. Um, and whether or not you take notes, you should rely upon your memories as much as possible and not upon your notes. The notes should be used to help you refresh your own recollection about the evidence and testimony in the case. You must leave your notes in your jury notebook. Nobody will read your notes. At the end of the case, the juror notes are simply shredded. Just for your information, under most circumstances, and I've had occasions where jurors have requested, can we see the testimony of witness A, B, or C? And as you might imagine, my court reporter has to take down everything that's said, and then in order to provide a transcript, has to proofread that and make sure it's accurate before the jury could see it. And in some circumstances, that may be available, but in many circumstances, it may not. The only reason I tell you that is as it might bear on your decision or whether or not you want to take notes. At this time, I'm going to turn the matter over to counsel for the parties to make their opening statements. We'll start with the prosecution as they bear the burden of proof.
This Elijah McClain on August 24th, 2019. He was just 23 years old. Elijah was different. He was an introvert. He didn't kill flies. Elijah McClain did not eat meat. He didn't judge people. And you will hear in this case that Elijah McClain told all those things to the Aurora police officers who stopped and contacted him. And you will also hear that all those police officers did not listen to him. They did not listen to him when he said, "I can't breathe." They did not listen to him when he started to drown in his own vomit. And they certainly didn't pay attention as he got quieter and quieter and quieter. This is Elijah McClain, just a few weeks before he died. And in this photograph, he is wearing almost the exact same clothing that he was wearing and was considered suspicious on August 24th of 2019. He wore to work the same pants, same jacket, and instead of a red hoodie, he had on a runner's mask that he wore running. Almost the exact same clothing on August 24th, 2019. On August 24th, 2019, Elijah McClain was alive, healthy, until he met the defendant, Woodyard. In the next 18 minutes of his life, directly due to the Nathan Woodyard's choice of using a police restraint hold called the carotid hold, Elijah McClain would have such medical distress that it would set off a cascading flow of medical injuries to his body that would cause him to stop breathing, cause him to vomit, cause him to start to drown. And the defendant and his fellow officers did nothing. Nothing. You will hear on the body worn camera that Elijah McClain was telling the officers he couldn't breathe, was essentially begging for them to help him. Mr. Woodyard did not follow his training, and it had catastrophic effect on Mr. McClain. I wanted to give you this timeline, to give you the broad overview of what happened to Elijah McClain in the last 18 minutes of his life. And in some ways, I'm jumping ahead, but I thought it might be helpful for you to see the broad view first. Because you will find out, as I progress in my opening statement, that there's an initial contact that happens very quickly, that the defendant grabs Mr. McClain, that he conducts the carotid hold on him, that Mr. McClain then becomes super sick, and then for the next 15 minutes, there is no medical intervention by the defendant, Mr. Woodyard, or his fellow officers. And then when the fire department shows up on scene and there are paramedics, they too don't intervene except for visually looking at it. And it will be the evidence that the police officers and the fire department together as a team, a very bad team, who did nothing to help Mr. McClain, caused Mr. McClain to die. And at the end, there was a sedative that was given that didn't need to be given because Mr. McClain was not the crazy, super strong individual that the police officers suggested to the paramedics. And of course, one of the questions that you will have to ask is, was it? The people respectfully submit that he was not. This trial is about the defendant and his teammates doing nothing to help Elijah McClain. This trial is about their continued callousness and indifference to Mr. McClain's suffering. But what happened on August 24th, 2019? Elijah McClain was leaving his home, and you can see it at the top of the screen. And he was walking to the Shell station, and there was a mini market there, and he was going to buy some iced teas. He had on the outfit that you saw that he wore to work, and he had on earbuds. And as he walked along, he was listening to his music, living his life. He walked to the Shell station, which you all can see on the screen. And along the way, another young person saw him, a 17-year-old. Now, Elijah doesn't know that anyone's watching him. He's just doing his thing. And as he's listening to music, he's doing a little dance. 17-year-old thought it was weird, so he called 911. He said to the dispatcher, I see this guy. He's wearing a mask. He's got a black pants on and a brown shirt. He's waving his arms. The dispatcher asked him, well, are you afraid? Is there danger? No. You see any weapons? No. And the 17-year-old specifically said to the dispatch, I don't see weapons, and I don't know, is he a good guy or a bad guy? He lets the dispatcher know right off the bat, I don't know what's going on, essentially. So here we have Elijah McClain at the Shell station. He walks in, and what you'll see on this clip is that he's buying this iced tea, he's waiting to pay. He kindly pulls out his wallet, he unzips his jacket, he pulls out, he pays. And then right before he leaves, he bows to the people as he walks out the door. And no one in this video seems at all afraid or scared of Elijah McClain. If you notice, the woman behind Elijah McClain, she even has a jacket on. And it's August. He just bowed and walks out the door and goes about his life. The next clip is Elijah McClain leaving the Shell station. And you'll see that he does this little wave as if he's dancing. And we'll later, in just a few slides, find out that he tells the officers he's taking out his earbuds so he can listen to them. So we know he's listening to music. Please watch. There's that little wave that was on. Doing his own thing, having his groove on. But based on that 911 call and the dispatch, officers were dispatched out to the area of the Shell station to find out what the suspicious person was all about. With these officers who responded. Now, Mr. Woodyard was the primary officer. This was his call. And he pulled up and waited until he saw his cover car, Mr. Rodema and Mr. Rosenblatt, and they were together. So it was 3 officers. And what's interesting, and as you watch the body worn camera, some things to note, because sometimes it's hard to see who the officers are. So we'll have put up signposts so you can start to see the faces and the names. Sometimes the cameras are off or turned off. And by policy, they were always supposed to be playing. Some of the cameras get knocked down and not put back on. So you'll see that as you watch the body worn camera clips. One important thing to note at the very beginning is that the Aurora Police Department had a policy to de-escalate situations. How do you contact citizens in our community? What things do you avoid or try to do? How about active listening is the first bullet point. How about nonverbal behavior? And how about if you try to build a rapport? As you watch the initial reaction and connection between Mr. Woodyard and McClain, you will see that Mr. Woodyard violates every one of these bullet points. We're back to Elijah. Walking down the street, 1043. He's got his phone in his right hand, nice tees that he bought in the left, just doing his thing. And as I indicated, just to help you follow along with the body worn camera, these are the initial officers that contact him. And so you'll see it's the defendant standing up with a ball cap and a beard. And at some point, and I'll point it out later, he takes the ball cap off and puts it on. But just remember that sometimes he may look a little different in future body worn camera clips. And then you have Mr. Rodino, who typically always has his glasses on his head, and Mr. Rosenblatt, who also has a ball cap on, glasses, and a beard. Just orientation. So, you may wonder why this says 10:43:26. Do seconds really matter? Well, in this case, the people will submit to you, seconds, dangerous, deadly for Mr. McClain, and those seconds truly matter. In this clip, you will see that as Elijah McClain is walking down the street, minding his own business, Mr. Woodyard gets out of his patrol car, and the first thing he says is, "Stop, stop, stop." And when Elijah McClain says, "I have the right," and Mr. Woodyard interrupts him and says, "I have the right. You're being suspicious." And then Elijah McClain says, "Well, okay." As if to say, "All right, I'll stop." And then you hear Mr. Woodyard say, "Turn around, turn around." And I'll play this clip in just a minute. But just remember, there's no introductions. You won't hear any evidence that Mr. Woodyard went up and said, "My name's Officer Woodyard." You won't hear any evidence that he said, "We got a 911 call. We just want to talk to you about it." You won't hear any evidence that says, "Tell us why you're wearing a mask, a runner's mask in August. Do you have a medical condition or something like that?" None of that happens. And what's most important is, this is 8 seconds from when he gets out of the police car.
In favor, stop right there. Hey, stop right there. Stop, 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 stop. I have a right to stop you because you're being suspicious.
Well, okay.
Turn around.
No.
Turn.
Go back to the escalation slide just saw. Did you see any report? Did you see anything about explaining why you're there? Not using nonverbal behavior like laying your hands on someone without introducing yourself? Don't. So we get to the next clip. And it's clear because Mr. Woodyard chose to go hands-on in 8 seconds without any explanation. And Elijah McClain is attempting to have a conversation. But Mr. Woodyard, the evidence will be, is focused on having a confrontation. Elijah McClain is saying, "Hey, wait a minute," to that degree. And it's Mr. Woodyard who's saying, "Stop." Mr. McClain will say, "I'm an introvert. Please respect my boundaries. He'll explain that he's just going home. And Mr. Woodyard ignores all that information. And he keeps commanding, stop tensing up, dude, stop tensing up. And then he says, relax. I'm going to have to change the situation. Now, if you can see from the still, Mr. Woodyard's hand is on Elijah's back.
Turn around.
Actually, your hand, bro.
Turn around. Stop tensing up, dude. Stop tensing up, bro. Stop tensing up.
Let go of me.
Stop tensing up.
Let me
Stop
go.
tensing up.
No, let go of me.
Stop tensing up.
No, I am an introvert. Please
Stop
respect
tensing
the
up.
boundaries that I am
Trying to.
speaking.
Stop tensing up.
Stop.
Relax.
Stop. I'm going home.
Relax, or I'm going to have to change this situation.
I'm going to change the situation. The evidence will be 8 seconds in. No explanation, no introductions. He's not treating Elijah McClain as a citizen. It's clear for the next camera angle from Mr. Rosenblatt that as he gets out of his car and is approaching Mr. Woodyard and Elijah McClain, that Mr. Woodyard makes a beeline to contact him. We are once again in the next clip. You have Mr. Rosenblatt on the left, Elijah in the middle, and Mr. Woodyard on the right. And just remind you, 30 seconds at the beginning of every clip, the sound just doesn't come on. It's part of the makeup of the body worn camera system. So you're not hearing it because there just isn't, it's not the way it's made.
Tensing up.
Of me.
Listen to
No,
me, bro.
let go of me.
This isn't gonna go
No,
well.
I am an introvert. Please
Stop.
respect
Tensing
the
up.
boundaries that I
Trying
am
to.
speaking.
Relax.
Stop.
Relax.
Stop. I'm going home.
Relax, I'm going to have to
Leave.
change this situation, dude.
Next clip I'll show you is from Mr. Rodima's body worn camera. And just to remember, keep you on that timeline, it's not even 1 full minute from when Mr. Woodyard got out of his car. It's actually 37 seconds. And you'll hear Mr. McClain trying to engage with the officers and explaining, you guys started to arrest me and I was stopping my music to listen. Now let go of me. But instead of stopping, stepping back, de-escalating, this team pushes forward, surrounds Mr. McClain. And the escalation goes the other way. And if the people submit to you, it becomes almost aggressive. And Mr. Rosenblatt says, let's go over to the grass. We're going to lay you down. And we're still at 37 seconds from the time that Elijah McClain was simply walking down the street, listening to his music. And it's at this moment that Elijah hears, we're going to lay you down, that he starts talking about, I have rights. And it is a little hard to hear on the body worn camera, but it says, I have rights and I can walk down the sidewalk. I intend to take my power back. And when he says that statement, it's not yelled, he's not screaming, he's not cursing. It's simply stated matter-of-factly. And he's surrounded by 3 men. And as you can tell from the Shell Market video and when he was walking down the sidewalk, Elijah McClain is not a big guy. 5'7", 140 pounds at the time of his autopsy. And he's surrounded by 3 men who individually and collectively weigh more than he does.
Stop tensing up. Stop tensing up. Stop tensing up.
Me.
Stop tensing up.
Stop. Let me
Stop
go
tensing up.
of me.
Listen to
No,
me, bro.
let go of me.
Chill out.
No, I am an introvert. Please
Stop
respect the
tensing up.
boundaries that I am
Trying to.
speaking.
Stop
Relax.
tensing up.
Stop.
Relax.
Stop. I'm going home.
Relax, or I'm going to have to
Leave.
change this situation, dude. Stop.
Leave me alone.
Sir, can you please
No.
cooperate?
Leave me alone.
No, we're gonna talk to you.
Started to arrest me, and I was stopping my music to listen. Now let go of me. Let go.
You guys,
I intend to take my power back, and I intend to be
Come on.
sincere.
dragging Mr. McClain from the sidewalk where he was walking, through these rock gardens, over the grass, and towards the building wall. And then this is still within 1 minute of the original contact. So it's happening so quickly. And none of the officers, especially the primary officer, Mr. Woodyard, takes the time to do what they're trained to do and do what the mandate is, which is de-escalate, build rapport, have a conversation, ask some questions. Never happens. And in this next clip that I'll show you, there is an alleged gun grab. You don't see it on the body worn camera. There's no clear evidence of it. Elijah McClain did not grab a gun, but that is what's set in motion when Mr. Rodima says it.
And take my power back. I intend to be century. I intend to be century.
Roger, go on, dude.
This statement, gun grab, sets off the next series of events. Sets off Mr. Rosenblatt and Mr. Woodyard doing some of the most risky restraints that the Aurora Police Department trains. And the reason why they're so risky is because a person can get very sick or very injured. And so they train it. And you have to take a test and you have to get 100%. And this defendant had had this training just 10 days earlier. And that training, that restraint is called carotid hold. And as you can see from the directive, it's only supposed to be used by officers when they meet violent resistance. And you will have to determine what you just saw. Was that violent resistance? People submit to you that based on the evidence, the answer is no. And you're also supposed to wait and see if lesser means are available to you. And in watching the body worn camera, no officer, including the primary officer, Mr. Woodyard, does anything to de-escalate and determine whether or not lesser means are available. And then here's the risk. You can have stroke, your heart can stop, there can be damage to the structure of your neck. They take this type of restraint seriously, as they should. You're not supposed to apply it repeatedly. Because what happens when you do the carotid hold is that you start to press in on the sides of the neck with your arms, which occludes the oxygen to the brain, cuts it off. So that's why the person goes unconscious, anywhere from 5 to 15 seconds, and then it takes 20 to 30 seconds to come back. And when people do come back, they're dizzy, they're disoriented, they might have memory loss, and they're risks. They may vomit, which could lead to aspiration. And then there are things that you're supposed to do right away. And this will come up in this trial over and over and over. Mr. Woodyard and his team do very few of these. They lay him on the side eventually. It's called the recovery position, but then they don't make sure that he maintains that recovery position. And that will become important in just a few more slides. They never check his vital signs. They don't provide first aid. They don't check for coherency. And that also will become important because as you listen to the body worn camera, you will initially hear that Elijah is talking to the officers, trying to explain who he is. They're not listening. And then little by little by little, just talking. And that's because you'll hear from our experts. Can't breathe. There's a lack of oxygen. He's essentially becoming a very sick young man. The only thing they do is Mr. Rosenblatt identifies fire and the sergeant arrives on the scene. Once again, going back to the timeline, this is all occurring 2 minutes from the time that Elijah was walking down the street. Now, Mr. Rosenblatt attempted the carotid hold, and it's unclear in the body worn camera how much he actually did. Because it becomes black during the body worn camera and all the cameras are hitting each other. But Mr. Woodyard did complete it, and you'll hear Elijah snoring. And you'll hear them talking about that he's out. And then right after that, he starts to vomit. And he starts to say, I can't breathe. The thing that happens is that when he starts to vomit, he's wearing that mask. And the mask catches the vomit and holds it in front of his mouth. And then because he's been struggling and he's breathing really hard, like anybody does when they're exercising essentially, moving fast, he inhales the vomit and it goes down the wrong tube. That is called aspiration. And we've all done it. When you're talking, you're not paying attention, you take a drink of water, it goes down the wrong tube and it burns and you have to cough it up. That is what is happening to Elijah McClain. And initially, the mask catches the vomit and then it goes back in. So this vicious cycle starts to happen, and that he's trying to breathe, the mask is covering him, he's inhaling his own vomit, and he starts really experiencing a medical emergency. And what has Mr. Woodyard been trained about in medical emergencies? When someone says, I can't breathe, which Elijah McClain tells them 6 to 7 times, he's been trained, take this seriously. Take this seriously. And on Mr. Rosenblatt's body worn camera, this is how Elijah sounded.
Relax, just relax, relax.
Relax.
Bring that arm back, just give me custody. What's his other hand?
I got it right here. He's in a bar hammer.
Breathe. Stop. And of course, at this point, Elijah McClain is experiencing all these bullet points you see on the screen. There's a shortness of breath, there's rapid breathing, there's air hunger. He can't feel like he can get enough air. You can tell it in his voice. And this next clip, Mr. Woodyard's body-worn camera has fallen into the ground, but is still picking up audio. And this is how Elijah McClain sounded on that audio.
Just relax, relax.
And it will become evident at this point that the defendant, Mr. Woodyard, is not following his training. He's been trained that this is a medical emergency. He's been trained that take it seriously. He's been trained that if someone says they can't breathe, just because they're talking doesn't mean they're getting adequate oxygen into their system. And the evidence will be that this defendant and his teammates don't tell fire that this is a medical emergency. We have a person on scene who's telling us, I can't breathe. So right now, on the timeline, we have all the officers grouped around Elijah. Elijah is face down or on his side, handcuffed. It's clear that the mask has come off. It's clear that he's vomited. The officers know that because they're asking for wipes and they're telling people, don't step into his vomit. You have Elijah still trying to communicate with the officers and still trying to tell them, this is who I am. Please listen to me. And the evidence will be, no one does. This team, first responders, this team that's supposed to protect, does nothing.
My name is Elijah McClain.
Way to use karate.
I made two very big ring. Oh no. Oh no.
Good job. Story.
I just
Yeah,
did
he
it.
wasn't completely. He lost consciousness.
I just did it. I just feel bad. It's awful. I'm so sorry. I don't do good. I don't do that stuff. I don't do any fighting.
The other guys are not there.
Why was he
With that, I'll leave it.
I don't do that. I don't need to kill life. I'm not gonna say all those people.
No, I mean, it's like we started walking away.
I try to speak with.
When we showed him up,
And all
he showed up, he was wearing a ski
They never
mask.
speak only.
Officer's there on the grass, still trying to tell the officers who he is. And they're too involved telling the sergeant, covering what they've just done. Term we use is CYA. To pay attention. I have my ID. My name is Elijah McClain. I don't do fighting. I don't have a gun. Why are you attacking me? Evidence will be Mr. Woodyard and his teammates are not paying attention, are not listening, are not following their de-escalation training. At some point, Sergeant Leonard is there, and he's getting debriefed. And that was sort of part of that last clip I just played. And other officers start to respond. And Sergeant Leonard has said on the radio, it's not a hot scene anymore. Everyone can slow down. You've got it under control. And yes, they did. Elijah McClain was no threat to anyone. Laying on the grass, handcuffed, he was done. And in this next clip, you'll see that Mr. Rodema and Mr. Rosenblatt are on the ground next to Elijah, and Mr. Woodyard is standing sort of at his head, sort of distracted, looking around, not paying attention. He's the primary officer. He's the reason why Elijah McClain is in this position. He's not paying attention.
Y'all need help or
Do
anything?
you have any wipes?
Wipes?
Yeah.
No, I don't.
Do you have a good grip on it?
He went like this, dude.
No, I'm good. Good to go.
Oh, that hurts. Because at this very moment, Mr. Rodema is doing pain compliance to keep Elijah McClain still. At this moment, Elijah McClain is just trying to breathe and get out the oxygen that he's inhaled, that has gone down the wrong airway. At this moment, Mr. Woodyard is too busy looking down at the ground to find what, his body-worn camera? I don't know. It won't be clear. But he's not following his training. He's not checking vitals. He's not kneeling down and trying to talk to Elijah McClain. He is too preoccupied. And so in the next video, you'll see that he comes in and out of Mr. Dunson's camera. And still, this time he has his hat off. He's still looking at the ground, still not paying attention. Indifferent to what is going on with Elijah McClain. Indifferent to what is going on to his health. Reckless as to what is going on with his health. And you'll see that Officer Green is there to the left and takes up a lot of the screen of Mr. Dunson's body-worn camera. And Mr. Woodyard now has taken off his hat, so he looks a little bit different, but he's the guy that is coming around and looking. And then you'll see that this is Mr. Rodema and Mr. Rosenblatt that are down on the ground with Elijah doing the pain compliance. Because even though Elijah McClain is on the ground and handcuffed and not a threat, they keep doing things to hurt him. A few seconds later, Mr. Woodyard leaves. Still again, the gentleman without the hat. And you'll hear in this clip that it's his sergeant, Sergeant Nunez, who says, Woody, and this is the moment when Mr. Woodyard abandons Elijah McClain.
Tell them to come in.
He can bend his knees a little bit. So he can balance himself.
Is that his cell phone over there?
He's kicking around. Okay.
So, with a red case? Y'all missing your cell phone or
I'm
anything?
not missing mine. You missing yours? You're in the car, right? Your cell phone? What's that? Your cell phone is in the car? I think so. Is it an iPhone?
Is with a red case?
No.
Okay.
We need to know. Good, brother.
There's a couple things about that clip. They go across the street. This is an intimate scene. And the reason why it's intimate is because it's small. If you look at this clip, you have the retaining wall on one side, which is the highway. And to the left of this clip is the apartment building. There's not a lot of places to go. It's the width of a street. They are, Mr. Woodyard and Sergeant Nunez, 15 to 20 steps away. They can hear what's going on. They can hear Mr. Rodema constantly correcting Elijah, constantly restraining him and doing pain compliance. And they could hear Elijah McClain groaning and trying to cough up that vomit that's gone down his wrong pipe. They are not speculation, Your Honor.
All right. Well, it sounds like we're doing closing argument rather than opening statement, so move on.
Sir. We will show evidence that they could hear it. You have to remember that Mr. Woodyard was the primary officer. Elijah McClain was his responsibility. He is the officer who chose to use the carotid hold. He's the one that should be at his side. He's the one that is hearing Mr. McClain say, "I can't breathe." And yet he does nothing to intercede. In the next clip, you will see that fire has arrived and the paramedics standing around Elijah McClain all have the pants on with the stripes and the suspenders. And you'll see that they're just standing there as the officers are still surrounding Elijah McClain. And in this next clip, you will see that Ms. Rodema is applying pain compliance on Elijah, and that Elijah is no longer in the recovery position, but is essentially, his chest is in the grass.
Asked him to say, hey, that's kind of weird. Nothing really criminal. My officers go to make contact with him. He starts acting crazy and they attack them. I'm so glad we think that tried to put a carotid on the guy. And actually.
Well, stop fighting us.
Put him out. They were able to get him handcuffs. We're still struggling with them. Fire on scene. And that's where we're at. I just want to let you know today how we did that. Carotid.
I'm trying. Please help me. His last words. Now, when you think about it, he has aspirated. The vomit has gone into his lungs, and he's not in the position that he can cough up the vomit. And coughing takes a certain physical action. You have to sort of bear down, get your muscles together, and have some energy to push that vomit up, back through your airway and out of your mouth. Because of his position, he's having a very difficult time doing that. I'm trying. I'm trying not to move. I'm trying not to upset you. I just want to breathe. And at this time, you will hear from our medical experts that Elijah McClain is very sick. And when the paramedics
What is on there?
show up, this is the information that is not given to them. The fact that he said 7 times, "I can't breathe." The fact that his vitals are never checked. The fact that he offered his ID and said his name. When he finally gets to the hospital, they still don't know who he is. They had to send Mr. Dunson there to try to determine and make ID because the officers were not listening. And no one tells them that he's deteriorated and he's become unresponsive. So now fire is there and they're waiting for Falk ambulance to come with a sedative. why did Elijah McClain need a sedative? He didn't. But during this period of time, when the paramedics showed up and they only do a visual assessment, they don't help him either. No one gets on the ground, takes his pulse. No one determines if he's breathing. They're just standing watching him. And the officers aren't doing either. So we're getting back to the bad team. And you'll have Mr. Woodyard, Miss Nunez, and Rosenblatt that are facing Elijah. And they're just standing there while everyone is grouped around him. And you will not hear in this clip, or any clip, that Mr. Woodyard says, hey, by the way, I use the carotid, and he's been telling us he can't breathe, and he told us his name, and I checked his vitals. He has violated all his training. And the next clip I show you, you will see that the ambulance driver, Ryan Walker, comes around and gives the shot of the sedative to the paramedic, who then injects it into Elijah McClain's shoulder. Once again, we've already talked about this, but these safety precautions are not being done by the police officers, and they're not being done by the paramedics. And this is just still where you have Mr. Rodema, who's holding Elijah McClain down. And this is the shot. And you'll see in the clip that Elijah McClain is not moving. He is not active. He is not excited.
Please take me in the name. I just told Redfern, when we did a carotid, let him know, so. I imagine this guy's not even going to jail tonight, based on his, there's no way.
Right there.
You okay?
Yeah, I'm good. Everybody is good.
Mr. Woodyard,
Famous
for
camera
your
got broken.
knowledge, is standing behind the stretcher.
Do we know where,
We already talked to the RP, we got the
Woody's
RP.
camera is?
What's that?
Do we know where Woody's camera is?
Go ahead, if you guys are okay with the long company.
Do you know where your camera is?
No,
My camera came off.
It's somewhere by.
Oh, wait, somewhere down there? Okay.
Probably.
Right there.
Okay.
I just.
Hey, Woodyard,
Yeah.
Rosa,
Yeah.
here in a minute, once this medicine kicks in, we're gonna uncuff him, put him on the bed,
Okay,
and then we're gonna restrain him south point of the bed.
all right, let me grab some gloves.
All right, let me grab some gloves. Mr. Woodward is directing. Woody, Rosie, we're gonna do this as soon as the medicine kicks in. Mr. Woodward was part of the team. He was in on this decision. He never stepped away, he never disengaged. He knew exactly what was going on. And in this next clip from Mr. Leonard's body-worn camera, you'll hear Mr. Leonard ask Mr. Woodyard, "Are you okay?" "I'm physically fine. I'm just frustrated. It is what it is." And then Sergeant Nunez pats him on the shoulder.
A bit over 5 minutes.
"I'm over 5 minutes.
I said you have a bit over 5 minutes remaining.
Sir.
I just need to let him know that there's no lieutenants over around here, so.
It's Mr. Woodyard who has the gloves on and it's coughing.
Can you give a big minute? We'll go ahead and, is he in custody?
You all right, brother? Are you okay?
I'm physically. All right. Situation's a little frustrating. Is what it is.
Okay.
That's what it is. And of course, by this time, you'll know from medical experts that Elijah McClain is slowly dying. In the next body-worn camera, you'll see just how much Mr. Woodyard is part of the team. Because after the sedative was given, Mr. Rodima is again reaching out to his teammate, Mr. Woodyard, saying, we're going to do this. We're going to do this. And Mr. Woodyard is right on board. He comes over and he has his flashlight and he's making sure that when they put Elijah on the gurney, that the restraints are in place. He knows exactly what's going on and he's part of this decision. He is aiding and encouraging what is going on.
It is. Sustained.
Here's what it is.
Go ahead and get him on his side, let his son help you.
Let's get him on the gurney first.
Okay.
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 Careful, careful.
Yeah, what is it? Are you on the boat? 15, just in case it starts spitting. So we can have that ready too.
Hey, Woodyard.
Mr. Woodyard is back. Starts to come around. Right there. In front of Mr. Elijah McClain. At this point, Elijah has flopped back onto the gurney, and all the vomit
Yeah,
is
you good?
sitting in his lungs has now spewed out and landed on
There's your
him.
camera. Okay, I'm not even sure what to do with it.
And you have one of the officers charting off Sergeant Leonard's body worn camera. To wrap up, I want to just talk to you very briefly about the two experts that you'll hear from. These men came into this case during the investigation to determine why Elijah died. And they will explain to you that it was the carotid hold that led to the aspiration, which led to acid being built in the body, which led to him being sleepy and drowsy. And so he did not need the ketamine. He was not a threat to anyone. And yet it was the officers not telling the paramedics what was going on that led to that shot being given. And you will also hear from the forensic pathologist, Dr. Sina. Initially, when he did the autopsy and gave his first report, he had not seen all the body worn camera. He had not seen all the body worn camera that you are going to see. And so initially he declared was undetermined. But after watching the body worn camera, he had an opinion that was very similar to Dr. Mitchell's, which is complications of ketamine administration following forcible restraint. Forcible restraint is the restraint by the police officers. And Dr. Mitchell will include the paramedics in this. So this is the timeline of Mr. McClain's deterioration. He's healthy, and then he becomes sicker, and you can hear it on the body worn camera. His breathing starts to really change. He gets sicker with his words, please help me. Then he becomes really sleepy, unresponsive, and not moving. And that's right before the ketamine is given. And then after the ketamine is given, when they sit him up, you'll see on another body worn camera clip later on in the trial that all that vomit that he's been drowning in comes up and lands on him. The people have charged Mr. Woodyard with reckless manslaughter for all of his reckless acts. And the evidence in this case will be that those reckless acts starting at the very first contact and continued all the way through. The reckless acts were the grab, the carotid hold, the fact that he didn't listen, the fact that he abandoned him, the fact that he should follow.
I'll allow it, I'll remind the jurors that opening statements are not evidence.
This is what the evidence will show. And it extends all the way to being ready and willing to support Mr. Rodima and the paramedics in their decision to give ketamine. I'm going to take you back to one of the very first clips.
You've got less than a minute.
in which Mr. Woodyard told Elijah McClain, I'm going to have to change this situation. And the evidence will be that Mr. Woodyard was true to his word. He changed Elijah McClain's situation forever. At the end of this trial, we're going to ask you to come back with a guilty verdict based on the evidence, the fact that we've proven the case beyond a reasonable doubt. Thank you.
Opening statement on behalf of Mr. Woodyard at this time.
Heartbreaking as it is. For this police officer is that simple. He did not kill him. Nothing Mr. Woodyard did caused Mr. McClain to die. None of the actions that he took, none of the force that he used is what caused the death in this case. He is not guilty. He's not guilty, but he's here. Mr. Woodyard is woven into the tragedy in this case. As they say, he's the primary officer because he got the call. He got the call of a scared 17-year-old kid in his neighborhood who saw something that he thought was scary. Mr. Woodyard did not seek out Mr. McClain. He did not make that judgment call on his own. He got a 911 call and he went. And the tragedy is incomprehensible. Mr. McClain was 23 years old. He was, by all accounts, a sweet young guy. And he'd gone to a gas station to buy iced tea. And he was walking home. Because police officers got a 911 call, they contacted him. This was the officer who got the call. He stopped him with other officers, put him in handcuffs after a struggle, and sometime later, because of a sequence of events, which Mr. Woodyard had no control over, Mr. McClain didn't come home. The evidence will take a toll on you. It will make you angry. It should make you angry. As tragic, as unforgivable as the loss in the case, the emotions are not the evidence. Legitimate and real, the emotions are not the evidence. The evidence is that it was not the stop. It was not going hands-on in 8 seconds. It was not the struggle. It was not the carotid hold. It was not Nathan Woodyard who killed Mr. McClain. And let me be very clear. They're right about something. Someone is guilty. They're not here. It's not Nathan. There is one and only one undisputed cause of death in this case, no matter how many sequential dots that they will ask you to connect. And that is a lethal injection of ketamine that was a dose too high for Elijah McClain that stopped his heart within minutes. He has nothing to do with that decision. That is a medical decision that was made by medical personnel independent of any police officer. And that is what killed Elijah McClain. It was too much. There will be various complicated hypotheticals, theories, possibilities, questions that they will present to you. The reason is clear. She just told you. He is the reason that Elijah McClain was in that position. That is not what you're here to decide. They have charged him with killing him. And he did not. But they say he's the primary, so somehow it's all on him. Everything that he had no say in, no way to predict, and frankly, the opposite of what he was trying to achieve. But that will be their case. 4 years later, with the benefit of hindsight, as 2020, unlimited resources, unlimited time to measure what unfolded for him in seconds. The amount of time that they have already spent talking to you is vastly in excess of what Nathan Woodyard had. He had minutes. We're going to start from the beginning and gear everything to convince you that he did everything wrong. From the moment he came into contact until paramedics, and you saw how many other people are there, and he is standing with his command officer, everything he did wrong along the way. This is not a case about a training slide. This is not a case about whether policies were violated. It's not a case about whether mistakes were made or something could have been done differently. It is a case about whether someone, this person, caused another person to die, and he simply did not. The only killer in the case is ketamine. But for more than 4 years, the state has investigated this incident, searching for a way to hold as many people as possible, frankly, accountable. You know he's not the only one charged, but that was the mission. These were tragic circumstances, a death in custody, the death of another young Black man stopped by the police. It deserved investigation. You will hear about multiple investigations, amending of investigations, changing of reports, expert after expert, geared to connect dots which don't connect. An exhaustive effort because he got the call. We got to get him too. When we boil it down to the simple truth of the case, you will hear it in painstaking detail. You will hear Elijah McClain's voice. In a clip they will play, talking to police officers, saying, "I'm sorry. I don't do that stuff. I'm an introvert. I don't eat meat. I don't kill flies," urgently talking to the police, apologizing to them. And that is the last time he physically interacted with Mr. McClain. There is no dispute in this case that when Officer Woodyard's interaction with Mr. McClain stopped, Mr. McClain was alive. And not only alive, alert, conscious, talking to the police. Police officers who were not him. You heard a lot in the opening statement about Elijah McClain, and you saw some pictures of him. They put up pictures and said, "This is Elijah McClain." In this case, you may hear from people who knew him, learn more about him. And just to make sure that we're all on the same page here, none of that is in dispute. He mattered. And he should still be here. It's not this officer's fault that he got that call. He is not a medical expert. He's a police officer. And when a scared kid called 911, dispatch told him to go. He didn't choose to be the primary officer. He didn't choose this. Nathan Woodyard didn't have the benefit of what we know now. He didn't have the benefit of everything they just told you. He had none of it. Those pictures of Mr. McClain, which are now widespread, he'd never seen them. The fact that Mr. McClain was buying iced tea, he didn't know that. He was assigned to a call which led to a situation he did not expect, he did not want, and he did not control. He could only react. And he reacted to this unknown individual in a ski mask who he did not know was Elijah McClain. There will be a lot of discussion about force, going hands-on in 8 seconds, start to finish. Mr. Woodyard used only the force that he believed at the time was necessary, consistent with what he was trained to do when responding to a suspicious person on a 911 call. Someone who he did not know was not armed. That was his job. On the night of August 24th, 2019, Mr. Woodyard had been a police officer for just over a couple of years. He had just signed into his shift in Aurora, the graveyard shift. It actually wasn't his shift. He had volunteered to cover it for another officer, and he was a single car unit, meaning he was alone. And not long after he was on duty that night, just getting into his patrol car, is when that 911 call came in. The 17-year-old called 911. And this was, importantly, long before COVID and masks were common. And it appeared to this young person to be unusual or worrisome. The report to 911 was that there was a person wearing a ski mask, waving his arms, behaving erratically in some way, waving arm and walking near the Shell gas station. And it stood out to him. We have all the benefit of this information now, but we live in a world where as a community, our shared experience is see something, say something. See something, say something. It's everywhere. At the Rockies game, on the Jumbotron, it's in every public transport hub, because we all know what can happen. See something, say something to police officers is supposed to mean do something. But the officer in the moment doesn't get the benefit of all of the information. Doesn't get a crystal ball. Doesn't get all the perfect information they're throwing back at him now. He doesn't get to know whether a person who someone else has called 911 on outside a gas station in a ski mask is Elijah McClain walking home with iced tea, or James Holmes walking into a movie theater. They don't know.
Sustained.
They don't get to know who they are responding to. And for Mr. Woodyard, who grew up in Aurora and knows this area, when that call came through, 911, suspicious party in a ski mask near the Shell gas station, it was something that he did not disregard. So he got the dispatch, 312, and he picked up 312. He's not on the 911 call. He just gets sent Tier 2, limited information. That was the nature of the call. He didn't perceive the option to disregard it, and he didn't know what he was responding to, and he simply did what he signed up to do. He went to the area of the call, and he saw a person who matched the description of the call, walking away from the gas station carrying a bag, plastic bag, and he believed that was the person for which someone had called 911. He didn't know it was Elijah McClain. He simply knew it was someone in a ski mask. He noted the coat in the middle of August. That is something police officers talk about in their training. And he didn't know what all may have prompted the 911 call. He didn't know the person was listening to music. He didn't know why the person didn't stop. He didn't know whether the person was going to try to run. He didn't know what the person in the mask had in the bag, where he was coming from, or where he was going. The purpose of the response was simply to contact him and ask those questions. He didn't know whether he was armed. He didn't know how the person would react. When the person reacted to him by not stopping and not tensing up and pulling away, he didn't know what that meant. He didn't know. They don't get to know. When Officer Woodyard saw this person in the mask, he activated his overhead lights so the person would see him. He drove past him, circled around, and parked his patrol car so that he wouldn't have a risk of catching the person by surprise, and he tried to approach him from the front. He said, "Hey man, stop right there. Stop. Stop right there," several times. And the person did not stop. He didn't know he couldn't hear him. Officer Woodyard, as he is trained, repeatedly and firmly said, "Stop, stop." It did not appear that the person was stopping. The purpose was to attempt to contact him, to talk to him, to find out what was going on. And very quickly, the person had a reaction. Police officers are trained that the most routine of stops can go bad in an instant. They are trained with videos of officers who have fallen in the line of duty, who have been killed on routine traffic stops. Under this is in the evidence.
It is argumentative. Move on.
Police officers are trained to approach stops with caution, to not assume that individuals are not armed. They are trained to check for weapons, and they are trained to control a person's hands to make sure they cannot grab for a weapon before they can de-escalate. Officer Woodyard wanted this person to see he was a police officer in case he hadn't heard him or didn't understand him. He walked right up in front of him, using force to obstruct his path, using his hands to control the arms of the individual so a weapon could not be drawn, telling him, "Calm down, sir, stop, stop, calm down. If you don't calm down, I will change the situation." But it wasn't Officer Woodyard who changed the situation. We will spend days, maybe even into weeks, scrutinizing Mr. Woodyard's approach in contact with Mr. McClain. He lived it second by second, reacting as best he could with limited information in the moment. In the entire interaction between Officer Woodyard and Mr. McClain was approximately 5 minutes. They will spend hours evaluating seconds. You will see, in fact, let me play.
In favor, stop right there. Hey, stop right there. Stop, 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 stop. I have a right to stop you because you're being suspicious.
Well, okay.
Turn around,
No,
turn around,
actually, you're home, bro.
turn around. Stop tensing up, dude. Stop tensing up, bro. Stop tensing up.
Let go of me.
Stop tensing up.
Let me
Stop
go.
tensing up.
No, let go of me.
Stop tensing up.
No, I am an introvert. Please
Stop
respect
tensing
the
up.
boundaries that
Trying
I'm
to.
speaking.
Stop tensing up.
Stop.
Relax.
Stop. I'm going home.
Relax, or I'm going to have to change this situation. Stop.
Leave me alone.
Stop.
Can you please?
No,
we all agree.
leave me alone.
No, we're gonna
First off,
talk
you
to.
guys started to arrest me, and I was stopping my music to listen. Now let go of me.
Let's get over the grass.
Lay you down. I sin, take my power back. Because I intend to be censored. I intend to be censored.
Just wrap your tongue, dude.
Stop, dude.
Ah. Give us more. Give us some more units. We're fighting them.
Stop, dude. You got him? Stop, dude. Got him on. Stop, punch. Yep, that's on. Yep. Oh, yeah. Let go of your arm, dude.
Let go of the choke. I got it. I got it in the bar hammer. Pull the arm out. Nice and strong. Slow it down. Slow it
Get his
down.
arm. Put on fire, start. Put your arm out, dude.
Get it.
Let go of your arm.
There we go. Ah.
Keep him coming, but start fire.
Okay, I've got his other arm.
Okay, the other arm.
Drop that arm.
Okay.
He's flipping, flipping.
Here.
Taser, 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 in sight.
You're gonna get tased in a second. Stop by.
Stop running. You're gonna get tased.
Got his arm.
Okay, hold on.
All right, got that one up.
Yep.
Stop, dude.
Get up.
Just relax.
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 Bring that arm back. Good.
That's in the bar hammer.
Stop.
I'm going. Okay.
All right, side.
On the spread of it, figure for his legs.
Cover. Cover.
Too many teams. You gotta move. Stop fighting us in the ground.
My name's Elijah McClain. What's up?
Way to use the product.
That's where Mr. Woodyard's interaction with Mr. McClain ends. Something did change the situation. Officers went from very firmly talking to him, standing with him. One officer said, let's move him into the grass. They did not drag him across the gravel. Another officer said, let's move him into the grass, and they had walked with him. And they are continuing to talk, and you will hear it saying, stop, 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 when another officer says, dude, he just grabbed your gun. And they call it this alleged gun grab. They cannot dispute that it was said and that he heard it. The next thing Officer Woodyard knows is they are all on the ground. Another officer said that, and other officers took Mr. McClain to the ground, and they were all on the ground. Control was lost. One moment, the officers were standing with Mr. McClain, trying to calm him down to talk to him, saying, stop, stop, stop. And you see them standing with him, and he is telling them he is going home, and he's tensing, and he's upset. And they're telling him, stop, stop, standing with him. No one has used a taser. No one has used a strike. No one has caused injury. no one has pulled a gun. But when another officer says he just grabbed your gun and they're all on the ground, Officer Woodyard found himself on the ground with two other officers struggling with someone who he still did not know whether he was armed. You hear other officers, even after this, saying, taser, taser, taser. And you have here an officer in that moment who did not draw his gun, who did not go for a taser, who did not administer a strike, but used non-lethal force to try to de-escalate this quickly before someone got hurt or killed. That's what he was trying to do, and that is what he was trained to do 10 days prior. A struggle on the ground with someone he doesn't know. He doesn't know it's Elijah McClain. If you don't know who that person is in the mask or why they are struggling, you don't know that they're an introvert. This is not evidence he had. He's on the ground with two other officers struggling with someone who clearly is trying to go home or get away or not comply in some fashion. His glasses have been knocked off, his body camera has been knocked off, and he finds himself in a position where he is sort of chest to Mr. McClain's back. And not knowing what other officers might do, he makes the decision to try to de-escalate this so no one gets hurt. That's what he's supposed to do. That is de-escalation. He applied that carotid hold exactly as they told him to. And they're going to make a lot about this neck hold, this carotid hold. That was an approved technique that the Aurora Police Department trained him to do in an instance like this so that no one would get hurt or killed. And it worked. Because after he releases it, he does it perfectly appropriately, as every expert will tell you. And when he releases it, you hear that struggle and you hear the I can't breathe. And then you hear Mr. McClain talking. And that's where I cut that off, because that's what he heard. When you see that slide of him standing in the back and he takes his hat off and wipes his head, kind of puts his hands up in the air, the other two officers are still on Mr. McClain. And then more come. And they want to talk about a deterioration. He wasn't there for that. They say, well, this was a very small area. He went with his commanding officer because that's what he was directed to do. He didn't abandon anyone. In fact, they had called paramedics so that if there were risks or if someone needed help, the person could get medical treatment, not an overdose of a lethal injection. He had seconds to figure out what to do in a situation that, frankly, can't be judged in the safety of a courtroom 4 years later. And against the backdrop of all of that, he used non-lethal force. This case, the death of Elijah McClain, is about what happened after Mr. Woodyard's interactions with him. From the continued restraints to the arrival of a number of other officers and paramedics in this argument about a worsening position, he didn't know that. And it is not appropriate for a police officer who is not trained in medical care to be intervening with an ambulance on scene. There is nothing Mr. Woodyard could have done to have stopped that lethal injection, and there's nothing he did that caused Mr. McClain to die prior to it. No matter how you feel about the stop in this case or the force, I can rephrase that piece, Your Honor.
Please.
The case will include evidence of force. The force is not the cause of death. The case will include evidence of medical testimony. The state's pathologist, the person who did the autopsy, the death investigation in this case, will tell you, both in the original and the amended report, that there was no injury to Mr. McClain from the carotid hold. It appears to have been done correctly, and Mr. McClain recovered from it within seconds. His level of consciousness following the hold is undisputed. It's captured on cameras. It did not affect his breathing or his oxygen levels. And no matter how many theories they posit, the evidence in this case is that it was not the carotid hold that killed Mr. McClain. That's the evidence. When the experts testify, listen closely for things like, I can't exclude, may have, possible that, I have a hunch, and most importantly, I can't prove this, but, or I can't be certain, but. The medical evidence in this case is unclear and in dispute. The one thing agreed upon is the ketamine. It was not the aspiration that caused Mr. McClain to die. It was not hypoxia. It was not acidosis. And there is no evidence in this case that but for the ketamine, he would have died. He would not have. They told you about this 18-minute spectrum, everything from start to finish. Mr. Woodyard was involved for 5. The moments leading up to the ketamine injection, the moments just prior and during, when everyone else is standing around him, close to him, restraining him, filling a syringe. He's with the commanding officer in the backdrop. No control over that. With all that said, we will always come back to the fact that he was there. He was the officer who was dispatched. He is the officer who made contact. He's woven into the tragedy. He was there at the start of a sequence of events. He did not produce that sequence of events. He did not participate in the events that led to the death of Mr. McClain. And all the time, they'll spend telling you what he did wrong, what mistakes he made, what he could have done or should have done differently. No one disputes that. You know who doesn't dispute that? This case is not about what you can piece together in hindsight over 4 years. It's about what a police officer in about 4 minutes knew when he was just responding to a 911 call without any of the information that they have in this case. And that is the nature of it, nature of a tragedy. Can never go back. You can wish that you knew things you couldn't possibly know. There's no way he could have predicted this would happen. And there's no way he could have stopped paramedics over whom he has no control. There is one thing that he knows now that he knows then. He did not kill Elijah McClain. He did not. They say, well, Mr. McClain was alive until he met Mr. Woodyard. That's true. That's not what we're here to decide. He was alive after he met Mr. Woodyard. When Mr. Woodyard left, disengaged, stopped participating, and listened to his commanding officer, Mr. McClain was alive. Those are the moments that matter in this case. And he wasn't part of them. That is the evidence. And as difficult as it is not about a sequence of events. It's about cause, causing someone to die. He is not the police. He is not a bad team. He's not the officers. He's the only one who wasn't physically interacting with Mr. McClain in those moments leading up to his death. And he is not the one who injected him with a lethal dose of ketamine. We will ask you to find him not guilty.
Folks on the jury, we're going to take our lunch break at this time, a little bit early, but I'd like to have you back at 1 o'clock and reassembled so we can bring you back in to continue with the case. Do not form or express any opinions about the case, even amongst yourselves. Do no independent research, traditional or electronic. Avoid any press coverage about this case or this kind of case. And we'll see you in roughly an hour and a half. All right, the jurors have stepped out. Anything before we take our break? Oh, did one get filed?
Yes.
Okay. I'll find it and just don't see it at the moment.
Good. When did you want us back to start up?
But just, yeah, a few minutes before 1, just in case something comes up. All right, the court will be in recess.